first reach Prehistoric Canada Park, guests must journey deep into the Canadian forest and travel by boat down a gently winding river. Eventually, they reach a small, unassuming dock where they disembark and enter the Arrivals and Information Centre. Once guests have booked in and bought a map and a guide, they leave the centre by one of the two right-hand steps. From there they make their way past the decorative lake and the 4 luxury lodges, which guests who would like to stay longer at the park can stay in, reaching the long entrance building that separates the arrival area from the main park. The entrance building comprises the large corridors on the right that lead guests towards the first enclosure, a shop, toilets and a cafe, from which guests can also reach the park proper and see their first dinosaurs. If guests choose the right side, they can head to the path that will take them along the glass fencing of the enclosure. If they head to the left, through the cafe, they can go up the first of many steps to a raised walkway over the first enclosure, which is home to the Triceratops. The Triceratops enclosure is a large open area with a section of the West River and many ground plants for the dinos to forage in. Like all but one of the 17 enclosures in Prehistoric Canada, the long side fence of the enclosure is made of wood and glass, giving guests a clear and open view of the Triceratops as they make their way further into the park. At the other end of the enclosure there are toilets, steps to journey higher up the hillside, and a cafe with a seating area over the river, giving guests another clear view of the dinosaurs. The Triceratops, a large family group of adults and juveniles, spend a lot of their time in the river, drinking and looking for vegetation. Guests can then climb the tall wooden steps to make their way to the second enclosure, which can be first viewed from above. This enclosure is home to the Camarasaurus, a medium-sized sauropod which grazes in the vegetation-rich enclosure and also has its own section of the river. After following the hillside path, guests will reach steps that take them down to a bridge over the river, with more viewing opportunities of the Camarasaurus as they graze, drink and interact. Guests then descend another set of steps and make their way around a path beside the enclosure's glass fencing. They then reach the first of many terrace seating structures, which give guests a chance to rest and observe the dinosaurs. The path continues around and through the forest before reaching some more steps and a cafe. The cafe also has guest toilets and some deck seating over the river where guests can recuperate before ascending the next set of steps. These are about the highest steps in the park and take guests up to Enclosure 3, which is home to the Dilophosaurus. The Dilophosaurus is a medium-sized meat-eating theropod that feeds on fish in its enclosure that has dense foliage and a small lake. They are a mixed group of adults who are very active and vocal and who constantly try to test their enclosure's security. The ground along the side of the enclosure is sloped and often waterlogged, so guests make their way along a wooden walkway to the fourth enclosure, in which lives the Dryosuarus. The Dryosuarus are a small active herbivore that spend most of their day looking for food, either in the fooding trays or in the dense ground foliage. After watching them from the short section of glass fencing, guests have 2 more chances of viewing the Dryosaurus. Beforehand, however, they have to climb the steps cut into the hillside. Visiting Prehistoric Canada means a lot of walking and a lot of steps, which is why there are numerous cafes and other places to rest while still being able to view the animals. Once guests reach the top, they have another opportunity to watch the Dryosuaruses, as the open hillside allows them to look down onto the enclosure. Next, guests head down a few more steps to reach another rest area, complete with toilets and a cafe, which has a large raised seating area that provides guests with their final view of these small dinosaurs. After this, guests make their way across the long suspension bridge over the West River, which leads them to hills and enclosures on the opposite side. The next enclosure reached is home to the largest carnivore so far, the Torvosaurus. Guests descend steps which lead them to a small fenced area within the enclosure. Guests can now either view the dinosaurs through the glass fencing or from the raised cafe area above. Although the Torvosaurus is a large carnivore and the enclosure is comparatively small, the group lives peacefully together with few squabbles. The enclosure has a medium-sized lake, lots of vegetation and multiple feeding trays, which helps to reduce competition or aggression for food. Guests ascend out of the enclosure, then climb another short set of steps before following another hillside path leading to the next enclosure. The sixth enclosure is home to the Brachiosaurus and affords guests a close-up view of the dinosaurs via a treetop walkway that positions them roughly at head height. The walkway winds around the enclosure with a number of wider stopping points for guests to observe the large sauropods or to take photos. The Brachiosauruses are the second largest dinosaur in the park and enjoy a heavily planted enclosure with tall feeders, many trees and a lake to enter and drink from. The next enclosure is the largest in the park and contains the largest carnivore, the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Guests' first view of them is from a raised hillside a little way above a large lake. With no fences in between, guests have a clear view of the dinos. However, the depth of the water prevents the Rexes from being able to get close to the guests. There are 4 Rexes in the enclosure, 2 parents and 2 of their adult offspring. The third is kept in a different enclosure for safety reasons. Guests leave the hillside and walk along a long curved glass fence which allows them views of the Rexes as they traverse the enclosure, moving from the lake, bedding area and feeding area. At the end of the path, guests reach some steps leading to a raised walkway, similar to the one in the Brachiosaurus enclosure, but built more robustly, with metal and concrete as well as wooden beams. It is also taller than the Rexes, keeping guests above them as they pass by. Finally, guests arrive at the feeding area, which includes more terrace seating for guests to get excellent views while watching the Rexes feed. Guests then have the option to access another raised cafe and seating area, which provides excellent views of Enclosure 8, home to Iguanodons. The enclosure provides the large herbivores with a lake, a marshy area in which they do most of their grazing, and a densely planted area at the rear where they rest and sleep. Once guests leave the cafe, or if they have chosen to bypass it, they can follow a path to either then walk along the wooden walkway alongside the Iguanodons, or turn left and follow the path to Enclosure 9, which houses the Acrocanthosaurus. This family group of carnivores has an enclosure that is split into two by a stream. The near side is a marshy area which follows from the Iguanodon's enclosure and the empty area between. The far side is higher and wooded and is where the dinos can spend time away from the gaze of humans. Guests then head to Enclosure 10, which is home to one of the most popular inhabitants of the park and the first mammal, the Paraceratherium. Along the glass fencing is a cafe and some tables and 2 blocks of terrace seating. The enclosure is set into a hillside with a long row of steps for guests on the left side, which includes 2 walkways that extend into the enclosure for a close-up view. The enclosure has a stream at the front, which is continued from the Acrocanthosaurus enclosure, and a quiet area on the right for bedding. Trees, tall feeders and low feeders by the stream, and a curved path for the mammals to reach the top of the enclosure. After guests climb the long row of steps up the hill, they turn right on a narrow path between the top fence of the Paraceratherium enclosure and Enclosure 11 to the left. Enclosure 11 is home to the Smilodons and gives guests a different type of view of the prehistoric cats. Guests descend down to a short tunnel under the enclosure, then back up to a narrow walkway within it. To their left is a lake which holds a small island where the Smilodons feed. To the right is a cave with bedding and dense ground plants where they tend to rest and seek some cover away from the guests. Guests then follow the path down and up and out of the enclosure, where they soon reach the 12th enclosure, which is home to the Mammuthus, or woolly mammoth. Guests immediately get a clear view along the long glass fencing, before then climbing to another raised walkway for an even better view of the entire enclosure. Perpendicular to this walkway are two terrace seating areas alongside a path and a moat that removes the need for fencing, giving guests an unfettered view of the mammoths as they feed, bathe and explore their environment. The mammoths strip and rip out trees, which require regular replanting. At the far end of the enclosure, after the lake, fallen trees and ground foliage, is a partially enclosed bedding area. Guests then arrive at another, although the final, set of steps, which take them to the highest part of prehistoric Canada. Here they'll find toilets, vending machines and the inhabitants of Enclosure 13, the Ceolodonta or woolly rhino. Guests navigate the enclosure through a low walkway which facilitates clear views of the rhinos and their habitat. The enclosure is characterised by a long, small stream, heavy ground planting, trees and branches. The rhinos forage throughout the enclosure, exploring the plants and the stream. It's a large environment which gives the 8 rhinos room to escape into the space when they choose to, avoiding conflict. Guests next descend to a unique enclosure. This is home to a single T-Rex that is unable to live with the family group in Enclosure 7 due to its temperamental behaviour. The enclosure is the only one prehistoric Canada not enclosed by glass fencing. Guests queue to enter the enclosure as numbers are limited to prevent triggering the Rex's aggressive behaviour, as are a range of other actions like flash photography, running, etc. Guests enter the enclosure through a tunnel similar to the Smilodon enclosure, however the walkway is reinforced with steel pillars and mesh. It also winds its way around the enclosure rather than a straight line, giving guests a view of many parts of the enclosure, including the small lake and the feeding and bedding areas. Living on its own with strict guest rules in place, the T-Rex is generally calm and manageable. Along from the Rogue Rex enclosure is the 15th one, a large enclosure for the largest dinosaur in the park, Argentinosaurus. Steps take guests to a high walkway built onto the hillside above the enclosure. The enclosure has many tall planters, trees and ground plants. It also has a river running through it, the same one that flows through the Acrocanthosaurus and Paraceratherium enclosures. The walkway follows the contour of the hillside, giving guests close-up views of the thankfully docile sauropods at head height. At the end of the walkway, guests descend more steps, then can choose to go left and view the dinosaurs through the glass fencing, or go right up to a raised cafe to watch them while relaxing. The path runs right from the Argentinosaurus enclosure and heads to the penultimate one, which is for the Parasaurolophus. The first area again has some terrace seating next to a moat, giving uninterrupted view of the dinosaurs while they feed. The very vocal Parasaurolophus live in a large social group, gazing not only on their feeders but also in the marsh areas of the enclosure. Guests can view them not only from the terrace seating, but also from a cafe that has tables on a platform out into the enclosure. Guests continue around the enclosure via a long path next to a glass fence until eventually reaching the dinosaurs' bedding area. The guests can then head to another set of steps as they make their way to the final enclosure. Before they reach it, there are toilets, a cafe and more seating. The final enclosure is a unique habitat in prehistoric Canada, as it has been deliberately set up to enable breeding. The dinosaurs, Velociraptors, are the smallest in the park, but are nevertheless full of character. The enclosure is actually 4 built into an oval shape, with a central area by which guests observe the animals. A tunnel is again used to enter the viewing area, and once there, guests can view each of the enclosures through glass fencing. Each enclosure has a small lake, bedding and a nest area to facilitate any successful breeding. There is a male and female pair in each enclosure, which are all large enough to support their needs. This concludes the Prehistoric Canada Park Tour. If you've enjoyed it, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel. There's plenty more to come. And if you don't know, I'm Andy, I'm the Ginger Gamer, and I'll see you next time.